On today's episode, we have Frank Reid joining us for a conversation on culture, diversity and inclusion, and how to set your business up for success from a leadership standpoint. This is an episode you won't want to miss. Frank, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. It's always good to see you.
I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last couple of years, but I think you're a tremendous resource, especially here in the Arizona business community. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more about who you are and your background with all of our listeners?
All right, great. Love to. I am a career HR guy. I'm one of those. I've had a career over 30 years in the human resources area, and have worked for several multinational companies as the senior VP of HR, and had the opportunity to not only work in the U.S. but to work abroad. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a very rewarding career, very fulfilling. And when I decided to move to Arizona in 2015 full time, continued to stay in the HR arena as a consultant, and worked with the company here in town that does testing and assessments. And I was working there as a consultant and business development executive, and then moved on from there, and now have been working on my own as a consultant, doing some of the things I've been doing most of my career.
I'm sure for those individuals that are watching the YouTube version, I'm sure they probably recognize your famous face. I mean, you're well known and respected here in our business community. You've also been one of our previous A to Z BizLink guest speakers and featured in our Resources for Growth publication. But most recently, you've built quite the reputation on being a go-to resource on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Would you mind sharing maybe a little bit more about some of the work you're doing in that space?
Sure. I think my career goes all the way back to Lindsay, long before diversity and inclusion was even a word or a phrase. It was affirmative action. And so I've been actually working in this arena and trying to help with race relations and working with organizations trying to improve the representation of diverse employees throughout the organization from top to bottom most of my career. Some companies we got it right, some companies we didn't. And I think given some of the society changes that have taken place over the last 4 to 5 months, I think we are finally at a point in the nation where the country, and I think a lot of our companies, are starting to feel a sense of obligation and a sense of getting off the sidelines and taking actions to try to make the environment that they work in better for all employees. And as a result, I've seen an increase in demand for people who have an expertise in this arena to really sit down and work with companies and help them think through their strategy, to think through what impact they want to make. There are lots of needs in our society for lots of things, and you can't do everything. So you really need to be very clear and very specific about the things that you want to influence, that you feel will have the biggest impact on your business. So some people want to work on things like improving race relations within an organization. Some people may choose to want to work on dealing with systemic structural issues within the organization, their processes and systems that aren't allowing everybody to feel like they're being treated equitable. Some companies just want to make their employees aware of how to be a better person. So you got to really figure out what it is you want in the organization. And I think my background has allowed me the opportunity to work with lots of different companies over lots of different industries. And it's been helpful in helping organizations here now during this time period that we are in the history where we are, to really allow employees and companies to own this problem and to try to start doing something to make a difference where they work.
You've been such a leader in this space. I mean, I think you've been either our moderator or our guest speaker on the topic of diversity and inclusion every single year since we've created and launched A to Z BizLink. But I know that certainly a lot of organizations have recently reached out to us wondering, who are those go-to resources? And you've been able to help a number of them. So tying that into, I mean, this whole conversation ties into the overall culture of businesses, and how do you create a winning culture within within your organization. And so because of your HR background, I wanted to pick your brain on this specific topic. Any tips that you would offer any business owners or entrepreneurs as they're building their organizations?
So I think over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with some really great CEOs. And in a lot of smaller companies, the CEO or the business owner can significantly drive the culture of the organization, or the term we use is their footprints. There are some companies you see, like, I'll give you an example. One large company would be Virgin Airlines. There is no question that Richard Branson, the owner and the founder of Virgin Airlines and Virgin Business Corporation, he has put a mark on that business, no matter whether it's selling records years ago, or whether it's airplanes, or whether it's travel agencies or whatever. He has made an indelible mark on that business. There are few people who can do it that way because of the presence and because of their vision and their vision of what they would like to see happen in that organization, and they make it happen. Generally, though, here in the States, most executives, I think, should rely a little bit more on their employees to help drive that culture and that vision and those set of values. Back, I think years ago, when I started my career in HR, it was not uncommon for executives to sit in a conference room, come up with about 4 or 5 great slogans, and then get the posters made, get the paperweights made for everyone's desk, and put it out there and say, this is our culture. And there was never a connection between the employees and their values and the company's values, because executives felt that that was something that was in their job description to do, not employees. But the successful companies now, I think, figure out a way to solicit the impact and input and feedback from their employees, and to make sure that once you've gotten a set of values or a set of culture has been outlined, that you do something that a lot of companies still don't do to this day. And that is, if you've taken the time and made the investment to create a culture, then you need to figure out a way to implement, finding out when you hire new people that they actually fit that culture. So you develop a culture, and a lot of people, and then they hire people based on their skill sets. And you can do that, but if for every person you bring into the organization that you've not validated that their value system matches the value system of the company, is another potential problem you create. And when you're looking at hiring leaders and you don't do that validation, it gets even worse. The worst thing that can happen in a bad culture, I think one of the top contributors to a bad culture is bad leadership.
And how do you identify if somebody is a cultural fit for your organization? Are there any tips or strategies along those lines?
Well, I think during the interviewing process, I think it's important, because you really don't get another chance after that process to really validate that. So asking employees, what types of organizations fit your values? What are your values? What do you need to see from companies in order for you to feel proud to be a part of that organization? For instance, recently my son took a job in New York City, and I said to him, why are you moving across the country to take a job in another city? And he said, because of all the companies I've interviewed with, this is the only company that I found whose values align with mine. And they do so much that I not only am I what I think I do, I think I'm going to be proud to work there, but I'm excited to join them because of things like, understanding the carbon footprint, understanding the company's position and platform on social injustice. All those things were important to him. And he wanted to find a company who had made a commitment to the things that were important to him. And it goes into another area too, I think, Lindsay, because years ago when we did HR, we were very clear that we wanted people, when you come to work, you leave all of your problems from home at home. When you walk in the door, it's about business. And then when you leave business, you leave your problems at work, and then you go home and you have your personal life. Today, that whole model has been completely turned upside down. And the things we hear a lot of now is we want you to bring your whole self to work, right? The value that you bring to us is your whole self. So if we're gonna insist that people bring their whole selves to work, then it's important that we also make them understand that when you bring your whole self, that means the things that you're concerned about or the things that are on your mind are also the things that we're concerned about and the things that are on our mind. And the more connection you get and matching up those things and those values with each other's, the more engagement you get.
I think we've definitely progressed in that space now that so many of us are working from home. We don't have the ability to leave our home life,
That's
separate
right.
from our work life because it's all intermixed. So just, I'm curious, are there any other trends that you've kind of seen in that space as we've transitioned to the working from home dynamic?
So I think that we all know now that the two big barriers, I think, in my HR career that I've always seen, because this whole issue of remote working, or we call it telecommuting, um, years ago, the two big factors were companies not willing to make the investment in the technology to connect people outside of work. And the second reason, which was a little bit, I think, dumber, was uh, managers feeling that if I can't see you, you can't possibly be working, right? And so, but what COVID did was took both those things and said, you no longer have any control over either. If you want to stay in business, you got to figure out how to connect these folk away from business, and you won't be able to see them, and you still have to run your business. And now that we've had 6 months of doing this, I think a lot, even the diehards who really didn't want to do the remote working or didn't want to have their employees do it, are now acknowledging that life still goes on. And it almost doesn't even matter, Lindsay, whether they acknowledge it or not, because to a large extent, a lot of the better employees aren't coming back anyway. And if the company tries to force them back, they will simply find another company to work for. So I think that the leveraging, the power of who makes the decisions about where I work now has shifted a little bit. And I think a lot of progressive thinking or informed CEOs and business leaders realize that we'll never get 100% of our employees back in the building again. Um, that's a big change. And I think also the challenge for, or the tips that I would give managers now working in this environment is you really need to dial into your inner self to really understand how to get to each of your employees' needs. When they work every day, you got them 8 hours in one place. You can kind of assess the people that are struggling, the people who are having difficulties. But when they work remotely, you lose that ability. And the managers, I think that's going to do really well in this remote environment are going to be those managers who have figured out a way to stay connected to their employees at a level beyond the surface or beyond the work level. So asking a question before any meeting you have with a colleague, how are you feeling today? What's on your mind? Is it tough being at home by yourself? Asking and having a genuine concern to get to levels that we've not had to get to when employees showed up at work. And you ask people, how are you? And they would inevitably say, fine. And you go to the next question because you really wasn't interested in how they were doing. It was just kind of a traditional thing to say. And people pretended. And eventually, if somebody was hurting at work, you figured it out because you could see things that they would do that would be different. When you go remote, you lose all those opportunities to observe those things. And you got to figure out a mechanism to put in place to replace that because people are still hurting. They still have needs, and they still feel a need to connect to something that is sympathetic to what their needs are. And the new managers are going to have to create a level of emotional intelligence that they've never had to tap in before. And the ones that do well are going to be the ones who have the success and being able to reach their employees and get that information they need to give that person a lift or boost or an encouraging word or whatever.
Well, and I think the one thing to highlight is that it's not just the responsibility of the HR department. This is the responsibility of the entire executive team and all managers and
Absolutely.
leaders within the organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and making it okay to not be okay. We spent so much time in leadership and so much time in management and so much time in corporate America. Uh, and I think Brene Brown does a great job of vulnerability. It's to be able to feel okay to say I'm not okay. And I know one of the things we've talked about in this whole area of diversity and inclusion and social injustices, during after the George Floyd incident happened, it was the first time in my career that when a colleague asked me how I was not okay, and I was okay saying I'm not okay. I didn't know what I was going to do because that happened in Minneapolis. I'm here in Phoenix, but it impacted my life. It impacted it weighed on my heart. I was frustrated. I was angry because it happens over and over and over again. And all I wanted to do was to connect with someone who felt the same responses that I felt, to understand what I was going through. And I think about it, and I think part of what, and it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, part of what companies are now understanding is that if one person is hurting, generally others are. And if you have a person who is bringing up their whole selves to you and you want them to bring that whole self and you want them engaged, then you got to reach them at a level to help them sort through how do they get out of this state of being hurt or angry or frustrated, because they bring that to the office. And you're right. And when you're at home, you don't even have to take it with you because it's there, you know. And managers who don't want to deal with that because it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, will end up losing employees, because there are companies and there are leaders who are more than happy to start having these discussions and start really getting to know the employees at a level they've never had to do before.
Well, I think now is the perfect opportunity for leaders to step outside their comfort zone, and this is when they feel uncomfortable, that means that we're growing in all aspects. So just curious, I mean, I know you're a tremendous resource in this space and you provide a lot of guidance to individuals and business leaders, but are there any other resources out there that you often turn or refer individuals to?
Yeah. So there are most of the resources I think that I am familiar with are national or even global resources. So there are companies that I've partnered with over the years. When I ran HR functions, there are companies that I've worked with. Uh, Several of them were out of London, out of Europe. There are companies I've worked with here in the States. There is an excellent diversity and inclusion company, a resource in Tucson. And it's someone who I have a lot of respect and admiration for, because I met the principal when she was working with another company out of Europe. And her company was responsible for helping us to develop a D&I program for our global organization in almost 15, 20 countries, which was quite interesting because it doesn't quite work the same way as it does in the States, because we tend to focus on race, and in some countries where it's a little bit more homogeneous, it's kind of hard to make a program, build a D&I program. So you look at things like nationalism. And what we finally realized is the most effective diversity and inclusion program globally for us was a cultural D&I program. So there's many complexities and levels, but there are resources local. I do know some. There are some that are within the state, as I said, in Tucson, and then there are global companies that I've worked with. But the best way to do it is, there are a lot of people who are familiar with this arena, and just I think by using LinkedIn or putting a request on LinkedIn or some other social media, you can generally find people and resources that can help.
I'm curious, are there any books that you would recommend that have just helped you throughout your HR career or as it relates to company cultures?
Um, Probably not so much books as there are white papers and articles. I spend a lot of my researching and time is spent usually doing periodicals, journals, and I love ordering and capturing white papers because I think companies like McKinsey or companies like PwC, they will make the investment and spend the time doing the researching and doing the surveys and collecting management data and employee data to build culture. And they build some pretty neat and interesting white papers that you can use. And generally, you find that within certain industries, there's different types of data that you can find, and all of it's not connectable or relatable, but there is enough in each one of those resource papers that gives you can kind of lay out a groundwork or conceptualize what does a culture look like. Um, I used to always think that culture was something that managers made, and then they made people like fit into that. And but you start to realize that culture, everything that you do in your workplace touch culture. And the one thing I heard years ago is that you show me a company's incentive plan and I'll show you their culture, right? So a lot of people feel like whatever you're incenting your employees to do salary wise, that's what they're going to do. And the more they're incented to do that, the more that's what the culture is going to reflect. And a great example of that would be Wells Fargo. They created an environment that made it okay to cheat. And not only did they do it at high levels, but it permeated through the organization. And once you start to incent people financially to accomplish certain goals, then if you're not careful, then that can very much start to drive the culture of the organization. And you see it in other areas too. But that's just one of the glaring examples of how your compensation programs and how you incent your employees to do things has a huge impact on what your culture is, which is why it's important that when you're developing culture, all the stakeholders need to play an active role in helping to shape what that looks like and feels like. And it also needs to be something that the employees feel like they've had a say so in, so that it also allows them to feel vested. But culture is huge. And it's interesting about the other thing that's interesting about culture is the new challenge for the new leaderships and the new management teams around the country is balancing. We want people to be themselves. We want them to bring their authentic selves. We want diversity and we want inclusion, but this is our culture. So the challenge has to become balancing. How do you maintain a culture that you think is critical to the success of the business while you bring diverse people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, life experiences, diverse education? How do you bring all that together and still try to maintain? And that is a huge new opportunity for leaders. I do think the wrong decision is actively hiring people who are different and then forcing them into the culture you're trying to build, because you lose the opportunity to capture the richness and the uniqueness that they're bringing to the table to help make better decisions or to see things differently than others around them see it, so you don't get crazy things happening and or people being blindsided. One of the things we do that I've done in previous lifetimes in another company is we do team assessments. And the number one challenge we've seen in most of the assessments we've done, and the company's been around for over 40 years, is the biggest problem with leadership teams is that they are very homogenous in their thinking. And they basically have cloned each other and have created a leadership team that feels very good working together, but they're not very effective because they all have the same blind spots. They all have the same life experiences. So there's no new induction of any concepts or innovation or creativity because they are all cut from the same cloth. And I think the challenge has to be for leaders to say, as much as I'm comfortable having you, Lindsay, around me because we think so much alike, we really need to get people who think differently. And we need to be okay with those kinds of discussions that generate as a result of being different. And we think, and we know for a fact, that those companies that can do this successfully tend to be better financially. They tend to be better from a financial standpoint, and they tend to be more creative and innovative. But you can't have both. You can't have a homogeneous leadership team and then say we value innovation. It just can't happen. So the definition of innovation is diversity to me.
Great.
And so those are the kinds of things I think that all play a role in culture. They all play a role in diversity. They all play a role in inclusion. And the new management skill sets today that are going to be required to be successful to navigate through this is going to have to think about all those things we just talked about.
Frank, I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. For those individuals that would love to get some inside information or some guidance from you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
So they can reach me in my business. My email address is FR3Consulting@gmail.com. And that's the most effective way to get to me. And I'm always on it. So and I got people helping me kind of keep track of things. So if you need to track me down, that's the best way to do it. But I'm excited, Lindsay, because this is the first time I think in my career that I'm actually seeing companies who appear to be very committed to starting to change the culture of American businesses. And they're willing to now look at things that they in the past were never willing to do. And I think, and the more progressive companies would like their employees to go along on the journey with them. And that is very encouraging from an HR perspective and from a diversity and inclusion and culture perspective. Good stuff. A lot of good stuff is happening.
I agree. I couldn't be more excited. And I know you play an important role in helping with those progressive conversations. So Frank, thank you again for being here today.
My pleasure always. And if you need me, you know where to get me.